This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Day radio program. We're coming to you live from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. And tonight it is Teeny Tuesday, which means you can purchase 2 martinis for the price of 1, and they make some excellent martinis at the Peacock Alley. And I'm here with my co-host, Gary Emeneth, and we also have with us in the first half hour of the second hour of the legislature today, we have Jeff Olson, who is the Vice President for Advocacy, the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. The Credit Union Association of the Dakotas is the sponsor of the second hour of the legislature today, which you will be listening to, we hope. And also we have with us Mr. Bob Entringer, who is the director of the Department of Financial Institutions in the state of North Dakota. It used to be called the Banking Department, and now it's called the Department of Financial Institutions. The department regulates banks and credit unions that are state chartered. And we'll be discussing with him some industry issues. Welcome, gentlemen. First of all, Gary Emeneth, we like to talk about the specials at Peacock
That's
Alley.
my contribution to the show.
Yeah.
I run the controls, and every now and then I'll talk about the specials.
Let's talk about martinis.
But I'm really not much of a martini drinker, but I understand. I have had 1 or 2 here, but not very many. But
are they shaken? Are they vodka or gin?
They're stirred.
Jeff, why don't you help us out here? Because maybe you're better than me.
They're shaken.
They're shaken.
Sorry.
So Gary, are your martinis vodka or gin?
I tend to drink gin martinis.
And what about, are they shaken or stirred?
I have no idea. I just order a dry martini with extra olives. That's what I ask for.
What is a dry martini?
I have no idea. No, I think you just put more vermouth in, don't you? Don't you do?
Or less.
Jeff? Or less?
Yeah. I don't know what the term
and
dry
then we like
means.
Then we like it dirty, so you put a little bit of olive juice in it.
Oh yeah, that's dirty. That's what I'm looking for. So, but anyway, Peacock Alley is known for their martinis, and if you're going to come down and have 2 for 1, you're going to want to have someone with you, or else have someone drive you, or take a taxi, because it's icy out there, and we sure don't want to have anybody spending time behind bars tonight, because it's, as we had in our Great Plains Examiner, the laws are going to get tougher in this state when it comes to drinking and driving. So we want to have you be a little sensitive to that, of course. And so, Dale, you got a busy hour ahead. We've had some fun talking to other issues earlier in the evening. So
we do, and we normally open the each hour talking about what the legislature did on that particular day. But today, that will be a short presentation because the legislature did absolutely nothing. The legislature is not in session today. They weren't in session on Monday, and they weren't in session on Friday, but they will be in session tomorrow on Wednesday, so you can resume your vigilance about your life, liberty, and property, because the legislature is back in town on Wednesday.
Full schedule tomorrow.
And they'll be doing their business. They're starting hearings at 9 a.m. They'll have their floor sessions at 1 p.m., and they're on the finishing kick to the end of the session. It's an 80-day session. The last day, if it runs for a full 80 days, will be on May 1st, and so there's a limited amount of time to get a lot of business done, and we'll be watching how that goes.
Got a question for you, Dale. What the crossovers where bills go that passed from the House and go over to the Senate, and the Senate that passed go over to the House? How many bills? In other words, they have to get to 1,000 bills ballpark, right?
About 900, yeah.
Is that what it was? Mm-hmm. How many in a passing that they have to deal with? Do you know the number that they're going to deal with in this at all?
I don't. I should know that, but I don't know.
You should know that. You do not. Yeah. I'm surprised you don't have that number right there.
Well, it used to be that you could look this up online, but you can't. At least I can't. I don't know how to do it. The legislators can, but I can't. Yeah, okay. But they have a special system.
This is when a lot of bills die.
Yeah.
There has been, haven't there? I've heard there's been. I've been reading your Great Plains News, Dale, and it seemed at least half of them you talk about the bills that didn't make it. You know what I mean? And some of them are significant, but I noticed the's been a lot that have died this time, which, as far as I'm concerned, probably good.
Yeah, I mean, we already have a century code that's about, 4 feet long, perhaps, and that doesn't even include the state administrative code, and this is to govern a state of approximately 700,000 people now, and so I think that's probably enough.
I would guess so.
Maybe we could do without more of those, but we shall see. But anyway, we have Mr. Bob Entringer with us, and he is the director of the Department of Financial Institutions. And I guess the first question, sir, is what is it that you do? Who do you regulate?
We regulate the state-chartered banks, state-chartered credit unions, and we also license collection agencies, money transmitters, deferred presentment service providers, which is more commonly known as payday lenders, and money brokers, which is primarily non-depository mortgage lenders. In Bismarck, that would be somebody like America's Home Loans.
And when you say you license these, what does that mean?
They can't do that business in North Dakota. They can't deal with a North Dakota resident without getting a license from us. Part of the licensing process involves us reviewing their business, their financial information. Some of them have to provide criminal background information. We do credit checks on the principals that own the companies, and once they meet those criteria, we'll issue them a license, and they go about their business.
And once they have a license, do you watch over what they do?
Yes. For example, our money brokers, we try to examine those about on a every 2 year basis. Money transmitters, we work with the National Association because most of them are national entities like Western Union, MoneyGram, that kind of thing. And so we participate in examinations with other states. Right now, in fact, we're examining one of the largest money transmitters in the nation, and there's about 8 states involved. So,
how long has that been going on?
The examination?
Yes, the examination.
This one, about a week and a half now.
And
so,
which money transmitter is it?
Western Union.
Okay. How long is it going to take to finish that up?
They'll finish up the on-site work at the end of this week, and they've actually been doing pre-exam for a couple of weeks ahead of that. So,
and payday lenders, what do you do with them?
We license them as well. They go through the same criteria, but we also examine them about every 2 to 3 years now.
How does an examination of a payday lender work?
Basically, we go in and look at the checks, make sure that balances to what they're showing, and then we review the file, make sure that they're completing the loan document properly. And the other thing that they have with our payday lenders, we have a database that we utilize, and so every transaction has to be, you have to see if the consumer is eligible for a transaction, because the state law limits each individual to $600 in the aggregate among all payday lenders within the state. And so they have to go on there, find out if this person is eligible for a loan, and if they are, then they can go ahead and complete the transaction, and then they record it on the database. So if you borrow $600, you're now locked out from any other payday lender until you pay that loan back.
Is that the $600 limit? Who sets that?
That was set by statute.
Okay. Do you know when it was set?
2001.
Okay, so it's been quite a while since it was raised.
Yes.
And again, the payday lenders have to essentially keep track of what they're lending to a particular person to make sure that that person doesn't go over $600.
Right.
Okay.
It's actually a pretty good safety net too, not only for the payday lenders and the risk, but it also is for the consumer.
Yeah, and that's primarily what it was for, is to protect the consumer from getting too far into the debt trap, as the consumer advocates refer to it.
Do you regulate interest rates? What someone can charge for interest rates is what I'm
typically saying. No, in the sense that most of the, well, not most, all of the lenders that we regulate are exempt from the usury statute, and that was set, I believe, in 1981. And so banks, credit unions, payday lenders, money brokers are all exempt from the usury limitation because they're considered a regulated lender.
Why does the usury limitation exist if it doesn't apply to anyone?
It's a good question. It actually, even for those that it does apply to, it only applies up to $35,000. And so, if you make a loan to somebody over $35,000, if you sold your home on a contract for deed, you'd be exempt from that limitation anyway.
Okay, what types of businesses does the usury statute apply to?
Essentially, it would be anyone that is entering into it's kind of a tricky question in that you can't loan money in North Dakota without being licensed by us. So
not even like if I wanted to loan money to you, would I need a license? Even if, like, say you're my buddy and I want to loan you $500.
If there's a note involved, you probably shouldn't be doing that unless you're licensed by us.
Okay.
So.
Okay, and just get back to the question: what does the usury statute apply to? What types of businesses?
It's very limited. You would even in the consumer or the retail installment statute, that is basically exempt from that as well. So it's to give you a good answer. I don't have a good answer for who it actually applies to.
Well, one thing that you said that was really interesting to me is that if you lend someone money, even if that person is a friend of yours, you're just loaning them money because you want to tide them over for some reason. Mm-hmm. You need to be licensed if you have some sort of paperwork involved.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm
correct,
if I go to my friend and say, "Will you sign this note promising to pay me back?"
mm-hmm.
then I need to go and get a license from you as a what?
You would be a money broker. The money broker statute really encompasses everybody that's loaning money that doesn't have a specific statute. So banks are chartered under our specific section. Credit unions are chartered under a specific section, and payday lenders. But anybody else would fall into our money broker statute.
What if I wasn't charging the person interest? Would that make any difference?
Probably not.
Okay. And so also I can charge them whatever interest I want, if I understood you correctly, because
if
money brokers
regulated.
are exempt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. For those of you out there who are considering lending a friend of yours money and requiring a note from them for repayment,
better see Bob.
Be forewarned. You need to be licensed by the state of North Dakota to do that sort of thing. How many credit unions are there that are state chartered?
23.
And how often are they regulated? How often are they examined, I should say?
About every 15 to 18 months we examine them.
And what does that consist of doing?
The examination, when we examine a financial institution, a credit union or a bank, we go through, the end goal is to assign a CAMEL rating. And CAMEL stands for Capital Assets or Asset Quality, Management, Earnings, and Liquidity. That's the rating we assign a credit union. And so we're looking at those 5 areas primarily. But the biggest focus is asset quality, because that's where the risk is. When they're making loans, that's where they're going to lose the most money potentially, and that's what's going to cause the problems. And so that's where we focus, is looking at the loan portfolio and the investment portfolio.
And how long does it take to examine a typical, if there is such a thing, a typical credit union?
Average size credit union in North Dakota is probably around $50 million, I'm guessing. $50 million credit union would take us probably 2 weeks.
And talk about what you do when you examine a credit union or any financial institution, a bank or a credit union, I should say.
Well, we're, like I said, with the CAMEL rating, we're looking at all of the CAMEL components, and so starting with capital, we're looking at the adequacy of capital. Is it sufficient to withstand losses? And the bigger issue is, are they well capitalized? And those are terms that are defined in federal law. And so if they fall below those categories, there's potentially some things that get triggered. For example, if you fall into an adequately capitalized situation for a bank, you cannot accept broker deposits. For a credit union, if you fall into I think it's undercapitalized category, you start having to transfer money into the regular reserve account, which is their equity component. So among your earnings, you have to transfer 1/10 of your earnings into that capital account. But that, basically, where we're looking at how well is capital, the amount, and will it withstand losses if the institution isn't making money, or if there's some significant loan losses.
In this context, what is capital? What does that mean?
Capital is essentially the retained earnings of the institution. So the money that they've retained after they've paid all of their expenses, paid their interest to their customers. So that's the money that's left, the net profit.
Is it their cash in the bank? Can you compare
well,
it to that?
Not really. Obviously, your capital, part of it is comprised of cash, but you've got, on your balance sheet, you've got assets, which is your cash, your investments, your loans, your fixed assets. But on the other side, you've got the deposits of the customers, the money that you owe to them, and then your equity. So.
And why is it important for a financial institution to be well capitalized, and also what does that mean to be well capitalized?
Well, it's important because capital is essentially the last buffer of loss, and so if each financial institution has an allowance for loan losses, and so if a loan goes bad and they have to charge it off, it goes against that allowance for loan losses. That allowance then has to get replenished through an expense, and so if that allowance is depleted and the institution isn't making money, that money is eventually going to invade capital. And once it falls below a certain level, then the institution will be subject to enforcement action by us or potentially a federal regulator. In the case of credit unions, it would be the National Credit Union Administration.
What's considered a good capital amount?
From a regulatory perspective, capital is king. So north of 10% is generally what we like to see. But 8 to 10% is probably a reasonable level of capital.
Is there a minimum requirement?
Oh, absolutely. I believe 2% on a risk-based capital ratio is probably the bare minimum before you're going to probably face insolvency at that point.
And when we say percent of what?
Percent of assets,
okay.
risk-weighted assets. So.
Okay, and how many credit unions in particular and financial institutions in general have a healthy capital to asset ratio?
99.9 in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that gets talked about in our kind of oil economy is how much cash is coming in to North Dakota. Is this something that you've noticed as a bank regulator? I mean, are there greater inflows of cash into banks and credit unions in North Dakota?
Absolutely.
And it's a problem for some of us.
Yeah. It is.
How is it? Please explain to me how it is a problem for banks and credit unions to be getting lots of cash.
I've been doing this for 30 years, and there's bankers and credit union executives out there that have been doing it longer, and they never thought they'd have a problem of too much deposit money flowing in. But what it does is every time you deposit money into a financial institution, they have to turn around and invest that money in an asset, and whether it's investments or loans. But what it does is it increases the size of the asset base. And every time there's an increase in the asset base, capital has to go up as well. Because if you keep increasing assets and capital doesn't increase, your capital ratio will start to fall, and then you begin being subject to potential regulatory enforcement because your capital ratios. So the financial institutions in western North Dakota are experiencing huge deposit inflows, and so their capital ratios are and it's not because they're not making money. They're making money, but there's so much money coming in that their capital can't keep pace with the growth.
They can't make money fast enough to keep up with their deposit inflows.
Exactly.
I mean, aren't there loan customers out there that they can shove this money onto?
They are making loans, but it's the money is still coming in so at such a rate that the loan demand is probably less than the deposit inflows, which is really a surprising thing for us in the industry. How
much have deposits at the banks and credit unions, like as a percentage or as a gross amount, gone up in the last 5 years?
I just looked at our bank ratios, and I quoted, I think it was about 26% over from a 2005 to 2010, so we're not even talking 11 and 12, about 26%. And loan volume increased, not at the same rate, but pretty close.
How extraordinary is that to have a 26% increase in deposits over 5 years?
It's pretty significant.
Has it happened before in the state of North Dakota?
Not in my recollection.
Okay. Jeff Olson, the Vice President for Advocacy for the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. How much of this money are credit unions getting?
They're getting some of it. You're talking about the oil money. Yeah, they're getting some of it. As Bob talked about, there's an issue with credit unions, though, and they have turned back deposits because, as he talked about, credit unions can only make money through retained earnings, and they go into correct proactive action when they get below 7% net ratio. So they have to really watch that bottom line and where that money's going and how much they can take on. And yeah, they've turned money away and they've turned membership away because that does affect their net ratio.
So, Mr. Entringer, it's possible then, or it is occurring, that financial institutions in North Dakota are turning money away because they can't lend it out fast enough, or they can't invest it fast enough to.
Yep.
What do these people do then?
Well, unfortunately for credit unions, one of the options that banks have that credit unions don't is a program called it's the acronym is CDARS. It's Certificate of Deposit Account Registry System. And so what the banks are able to do is if you bring that money in, say you came in with $5 million, they can take that money, contact this CDARS group, and tell them we've got $5 million to place, and they'll send it out to other banks throughout the nation and give them, they'll quote them an interest rate, and they can place this money in insured deposits at banks throughout the nation, and it doesn't affect them. The customer still gets a statement from this group, but it's all insured in multiple banks across the nation, and unfortunately, it's not available to credit unions.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
All right. We've been speaking to Jeff Olson. He's the Vice President for Advocacy for the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. And also we've been speaking to Mr. Bob Entringer, who is the Director of the Department of Financial Institutions in the state of North Dakota. Mr. Entringer is an appointee of the governor, and he regulates banks and credit unions, state-chartered banks and credit unions in North Dakota, as well as other businesses that deal with money. We'll be back shortly with Bismarck Senator Dick Dever, the chairman of the Senate Government and Veterans Affairs Committee. Government and Veterans Affairs Committee, and he has been in the legislature. I believe you were first elected in 2000, were you not, Senator Dever?
That's right. This is my 7th session.
And can you explain, or can you describe the area of Bismarck that you represent, sir?
District 32 includes most of South Bismarck, and then a precinct that includes Cathedral Church, Roosevelt School, on up to Boulevard.
And Civic Center?
Civic Center's in District 32.
All right. And tell us about yourself a bit. Where are you from originally, and what do you do for a living?
Actually, I was born in Colorado when I was 6 years old. My dad made his career in the oil patch, and that's what brought us to North Dakota. So I grew up in northwest part of the state.
Where's that?
First, we lived in Souris up by Bottineau, and then later we moved to Burke County, and I graduated from high school in Flaxton High School.
Flaxton High School. Does that still exist?
No.
It's a ghost town.
Neither does Souris, by the way.
And how long have you lived in Bismarck, sir?
We've lived in Bismarck since 1987.
What do you do for a living?
I'm self-employed as a factory rep. I sell heating systems for shops and warehouses, and I travel the state. So the challenge in serving in the legislature is I do heating, I don't do air conditioning, so I'd like to change the session to summer.
So you like to meet during the summer, so you can get about your business during the cold months.
Sure.
You're the chairman of the Government and Veterans Affairs Committee in the North Dakota Senate, and can you just tell us about some of the issues that have come before your committee that you thought were of particular import?
Government and Veterans Affairs deals with all the veterans issues, the election issues, issues involving how government agencies do business. So we've had quite a few interesting issues. One bill that we had involved the Bank of North Dakota making loans, home mortgage loans in smaller towns, and it's a program that was started a couple of years ago, and it's worked so well that now they want to expand it and kind of loosen up some of the rules. Some of the banks were concerned about how they did that. One of the interesting things about that was that in the bill it referred to financial institutions, and we discovered that credit unions were not part of the definition of financial institutions. So we wanted to make sure that the protections that were extended to banks also included credit unions.
And can you tell us what was the rationale behind having the Bank of North Dakota participate in the home mortgage lending market?
Well, a lot of that had to do with the federal regulations that have come into the home mortgage business, and smaller town banks aren't set up to do that. Rather than sending their customers to a bank in a larger city, the banks in the smaller communities wanted to have the Bank of North Dakota handle those mortgages. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Yeah.
What other financial legislation have you dealt with so far?
Do you deal with public funds?
We do some with the municipal bank.
Yes.
Those kinds of things come through Government and Veterans Affairs. We deal with a large variety of issues in GVA. In fact, in the second half of the session, the Senate Government and Veterans Affairs Committee has more bills than any other committee in either chamber. We have 51 coming to us.
So you have more bills than appropriations?
Appropriations has bigger bills.
He's talking about policy bills.
We have more bills. Okay. They have bigger bills, but we have more.
Okay. And why? And what are these bills concerning? Why do you have so many?
Well, I think there's just a lot of interest in elections, and we've got a lot of veterans bills this session. We had some in the early part of the session regarding veterans. One that was real interesting was Senator Flacco brought a bill to require that we put together a book of every veteran who has died in the service in North Dakota, going back through the history of North Dakota. Another bill provided $50,000 in funding to provide service dogs to veterans with PTSD. Some of those kinds of issues get real emotional, and
there was another one to
garner a lot of support.
Provide $50,000 for caskets, wasn't there? And that passed.
And that one started out with $2.6 million for caskets for every veteran, and we amended that down to $50,000 to provide caskets for any veteran who would otherwise be buried in a welfare casket, because that's not right.
Okay. And I was looking at some of the bills you sponsored this session, and one of them dealt with something called biosimilars. Can you explain what a biosimilar is? It's a type of drug, is it not?
Sure. 99% of the time when you go get a prescription at a drugstore, the prescription medication that you're getting is chemical. Biosimilar is developed differently. It's developed from cells and grown, and they develop hybrids similar to the way that cattle herds are created or crops. So biologics are what those are called, and now biosimilars are coming on the market. With a chemical medication, you can reverse engineer it and develop exactly the same thing. With biologics, you can't quite do that, so there's some differences. No matter what you do, when you develop a similar product, it's not the same. So with those coming on the market, the bill provided guidelines on how those would be introduced into the market. And one of the requirements that some firms didn't like is the fact that pharmacists, if they make a substitution, would have to inform the doctor of that. And their concern is the doctor would then just hold to the initial and prescription and not want to substitute. And that it's kind of like generics. With generics, you end up with a lower priced product. So.
And what was who was against whom in this debate? I presume that biosimilar manufacturers were against original product manufacturers, and how
actually
did that work?
That's not quite the way it worked. The biologic manufacturers also manufacture biosimilar products. It was the pharmaceutical benefit managers that came in against the bill. The PBMs basically are large companies that buy or manage the purchase of pharmaceutical on a very large basis, and they saw that as limiting their competition.
And how did it work out so far?
Well, so far the bill's still alive. It is as it was introduced. Initially, there was an amendment brought to eliminate a couple of the guidelines, and the amendment passed. And the next day, I brought a floor amendment to put it back together, and was successful in doing that and sent it on. And
what is it that how do consumers benefit from this whole thing? I mean, whether it's a biosimilar or a bio-original or whatever it is.
Well, you know, biologic. An example of that is insulin, but biologics are developed for specific conditions, and it's sometimes critical, like dealing with cancer and those kinds of things, that the doctor be able to provide the exact product that the consumer needs. And I think part of the thing about creating the guidelines, I think, is to allow for competition, not to limit it. So I think prices will come down, but I think consumers, patients, and doctors will be able to work together without some of that. And part of the concern was also with mail order medications, where there isn't that communication between the pharmacy and the doctor.
And how does this legislation affect mail order medications?
Well, it's going to require that there be that communication between the pharmacy and the doctor.
In terms of which drug the patient gets?
Right, and they will be required within 24 hours of dispensing the medication of informing the doctor if they made a substitution.
And does this save the consumer money, these substitutions, generally?
I think so, and I think as long as the doctor is able to manage that, if a substitution is appropriate and it's less expensive, the doctor should approve it.
And you also sponsored a bill that deals with physician health, and this is, I just gathered from reading the bill, that it has to do with doctors who are impaired, who have drug or alcohol problems. And can you tell me what this bill was designed to do, what its purpose was?
Sure. The North Dakota Medical Association is the licensing board that licenses physicians. They currently have a program for physicians that develop an addiction problem or a chemical problem, and they have methods of treating that. What the bill did is allow them to set up a separate program where the doctor doesn't have to come to the medical association to involve themselves in that treatment program.
And what was the purpose of that, for doing that?
Well, they're concerned that professionals may not want to come to the board that regulates them to say that they have a problem.
Okay.
So this will allow for
and how
anonymity.
So now if they have a problem, they have to go to the licensing board? Or the medical association?
That's who provides the treatment.
Okay.
So that'll provide that separation. The dentist also came with another bill that, among other things, would allow them to participate in the same program.
How did that go?
It went well.
What sort of, I mean, you've been involved in some election issues, specifically bills over campaign contributions, over voter registration, or not voter registration, but voter identification. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about what your personal views are and what the Senate has done so far to change how people would vote in North Dakota?
Sure. First, I think everybody in North Dakota appreciates the integrity of the process that we have in North Dakota. We haven't had a lot of the issues that a lot of other states have had with recounts and those kinds of things. So when those issues come to us, it is with that in mind. And we have the voter ID bill coming now to the Senate. It passed through the House that will require people to have identification when they go to vote. And there are some concerns with senior citizens that may not have a driver's license. I think the House has addressed a lot of those, and we'll be taking another look at that, providing for a state ID, which people can get now, and I think the bill even pays for that.
Do you believe that someone who comes to vote should have identification?
I think that they need to be able to demonstrate that they are a qualified elector. I think identification is the easiest way to do that. I think when, this is North Dakota, if you come to the poll and the poll worker knows you, I don't know that you need to have an ID to show that.
But isn't it, as I understand the House bill, that is precisely what you would need. You'd need some form of identification to vote. You wouldn't be able to sign an affidavit saying that I am eligible. You wouldn't be allowed to have a poll worker vouch for you. You'd have to have an ID, would you not?
That's what the House bill shows.
And what do you think about that? Do you think that's necessary?
I think it's certainly an interesting argument, and we'll see where it goes when it comes to hearing.
Or we go back to voter registration.
One of the things that occurred quite a bit in discussion about voter ID is that, well, presently in North Dakota, you can go to the polls and you can vote, and you don't need to have identification. They ask you for identification, at least they do in Burleigh County where I vote, and most people, I think it's fair to say, bring identification and show it, but you are not required to have it. What the poll person can do is say, all right, you don't have identification. We want you to sign this affidavit, this sworn statement that says, yes, I am at least 18 years old, I am a U.S. citizen, I've lived in this precinct for 30 days, and I am eligible to vote. And that in the last election alone, I believe there are more than 10,000 of these. And if someone signs an affidavit and casts their ballot, their ballot's counted. It's not set aside and for checking or anything. Their ballot's counted, and if that person, it turns out that they weren't eligible for whatever reason, their ballot is counted anyway.
It's already counted.
Yes, and what the House bill does that we're talking about is it does require someone to bring an ID. It doesn't have to be a photo ID, and the Secretary of State can promulgate rules, as I understand it, to say what an acceptable ID is. But you do have to bring an ID, and does an ID solve the problem, if it is one, of figuring out who is actually eligible to vote, in your opinion?
Well, in the last election, when I went to the polls and everybody else, I gave my driver's license and they scanned it, and it indicated that I was a qualified elector. So that's the easiest way to do it. Currently, you can demonstrate, if you've got an out-of-state driver's license, you can demonstrate that you're a qualified elector by showing a utility bill or something that demonstrates that you've been in a certain house. College students that live out of state are able to vote in North Dakota if they're living in North Dakota. The colleges have worked on putting together a form that you can bring to the polls and demonstrate the same thing. My understanding currently with an affidavit is that the ballot will be counted, and then the county auditor is supposed to come back afterwards and confirm that you're a qualified voter.
Right.
There is a bill that would say that affidavit, that they would set the ballot aside, that you'd be required then to come back on the same day and demonstrate that you're a qualified elector. Some people come to the poll and just forget to bring an ID. So I think that argument has merits too.
I guess what it gets right down to is, do you think that there are problems with the existing system, and if so, how do you fix them?
I think that any problems that we have with the existing system are relatively minor, because this is North Dakota. But I think people appreciate the integrity of it.
Don't you think some of the issues that are driving this are coming from the cities with big universities where students, if you added to the affidavit that I think you ought to add that I have not voted in any other elections in state or out of state, or with some clarity to that. I'm just throwing that out there because some of the issues that when I was party chairman, we found happen at campuses where kids vote absentee back home in their state and they get to vote for the president or federal twice, and that's where there gets to be some problems. I think. So sometimes you try to solve a problem that's very isolated, but you try to do it over the whole state, and that's when you get people saying, "Give me a break." It doesn't happen.
Well, that's true, and it happens more in Fargo and Grand Forks.
That's what I'd say. That's right.
There.
That's right. Yeah. And it actually could have happened in Oil Patch, for that matter, this time around. But those are the issues that I think are, as a party, you have no way of tracking down. They're thrown in anyway, so if people vote, it's included. It's a struggle. So
sure.
We're speaking to Senator Dick Dever, who is a Republican from Bismarck. He represents the district in South Bismarck, and he is the chairman of the Senate Government and Veterans Affairs Committee. We've also been speaking to Jeff Olson, who is the vice president for advocacy for the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, which is the sponsor of the Hour of the Legislature Today program that you're listening to. And the gentleman whose voice you just heard is my co-host, Gary Emeneth. He's a Republican Party chairman and a former Republican Party chairman, and probably more familiar than most folks with the intricacies of voting in North Dakota and the potential for chicanery, if I may say. Senator Dever, do you think that North Dakota has the problem of voter fraud?
Well, I think probably anywhere has some examples of that, but I think it would be relatively minor in North Dakota.
Do you support voter registration in North Dakota?
North Dakota is the only state that does not have voter registration, and from a party point of view, it would be nice. But I like the fact that we can trust one another.
When you say a party point of view, what do you mean? Why would the party like voter registration?
Well, in some states with voter registration, you register by party as a Democrat or Republican or another party. Voter identification would be really nice from a campaign point of view. You know who to encourage to get to vote.
And so, is it true that with our current system that you have to, frankly, work a lot harder to figure out which voters are sympathetic to you?
I think that's true.
When you first ran for the legislature, Senator Dever, what were your goals, and have you accomplished them?
I think to some extent. You know that I ran and lost 3 times and won on the 4th attempt. So.
And you and your running mates, Mark Dosh and Lisa Meyer, turned out an entirely Democratic slate of legislators in that district.
We did, and that was in 2000. I think people were. We elected a new governor. We elected a new president. I think people were open to that, and I think we had a very positive message and some interesting approaches to the campaign, like serving coffee on the street corner.
Yes, and why did you want to get in? Why did you want to serve? What was your animating principle?
Well, initially I felt that my opponent did not represent me, and I ran. I think to represent the values that are important to me. It was interesting after I lost the first time. I thought, well, that was fun, so I'll try it again. And next time I thought, you haven't really lost in this game until you quit. So I ran again, and I lost again, and people said, well, 3 strikes, you're out. And I thought, first base, second base, third base, home. And the 4th time was a charm.
Was it fun to campaign and lose? Is that what I heard you say?
Well, it's one thing that Senator Dever is not given credit for is that he was very close in some of those races.
Yes,
and if you really take a look at the votes and you count the votes, and by changing your campaign strategy a little bit and doing things a little bit different, you could come out. You could have different results, and that's what happened.
You guys were famous for standing on the corner of the street, if I recall, and you kind of turned local politics around in Bismarck. Rather than radio, TV, and yard signs, you guys give coffee away, I recall, on the street corner. On mornings, you did it week after week, and some of those fall days weren't that nice out. So that's a great way to be out there in public.
And, I think the public really appreciates that positive energy that we put into that campaign.
Yeah. When you said the values that were important to you, what are they?
Well, there is nothing more important to me in this world than my family. And my wife and I have 3 children. They all live here in Bismarck, and 8 grandchildren. And I think those values are the values that we value that are important to us here in North Dakota. I'm a Christian, and I think we've got a lot of concerns with the value of life in our society. I heard you talking to the Attorney General earlier about gun control, and he's talking about the need of people to be able to defend themselves. We've got some serious concerns in this world.
How do we resolve them?
I think by people engaging themselves. I kind of have a 5-step process for civic involvement. Step 1 is to educate yourself. Step 2 is to decide for yourself what's right and what's wrong. Step 3 is what's important. Step 4 is recognize that you can't change everything. And step 5 is resolve to stand for what's right and fight for what's important.
The gentleman you've been listening to is Dick Dever. He is a Republican state senator from Bismarck, District 32, which is in South Bismarck. We've also been listening in this hour to my co-host, Gary Amoneth, and we've been listening to Jeff Olson, the Vice President for Advocacy for the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. My name is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today program, and we will hear you tomorrow night.